Now then, I'm going to switch subjects and uh, I'm going to talk about ethics. Now, ethics is a highfalutin word that the philosophers use that basically is just right and wrong. How do we know what's right and wrong? And what are the ramifications? What can we expect uh, because of right and wrong? And how can we change? And so forth. Um, and so, what I want to emphasize is that although humanity had fallen from that place with God in the Garden of Eden, that paradise where the communication between God and people was perfect, where the relationship between God and people was perfect, and that was broken with what we call the fall, paradise lost. And yet, what we find is that there still was within people a certain understanding of right and wrong. We have come to call it conscience. And in fact, the Bible talks about conscience. It is an inherent understanding of right and wrong. It's not perfect, uh, and it can be damaged. It can, in fact, be so damaged that basically some people, we'd say, just don't have a conscience. And that's a pretty accurate statement of what they're like. Not only that, but we can have a conscience and still sin, still do wrong. Conscience is not a perfect instrument within us. Nevertheless, we have a pretty good idea of what's right and wrong. And what I'm doing is kind of leading up to contrast that with what we call the law of Moses. Okay, so I mentioned Cain some time back, and we find that Cain, in fact, uh, had some idea about right and wrong. It says here in the fourth chapter, the Lord said to Cain, this is verse 6 of chapter 4 in Genesis. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. So the Lord gives Cain a counseling session, and he says, look, uh, make up your mind that you're not going to let this evil thought and this anger and resentment and jealousy rule over you. But let it go and move on and do the right thing. Cain didn't heed the Lord's warning. But implied here is that Cain had a certain degree of understanding of what's right and wrong. And the Lord is appealing to that conscience. of Cain, that he do the right thing. Now, we do find, of course, that people really got bad. Cain was a bad example, but he wasn't the only one. We find, I mentioned Noah, and we find the description of that time in Noah's day. The Lord saw, this is chapter 6 of Genesis, verse 5. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now, this is a blanket statement. I'm sure that there were degrees of this evil, but the point is the human race was in bad shape, to the point that there was just so much evil going on that God had to destroy most of the human race. And so, even though there is this conscience, there also is a tendency to evil. And there is a certain degree of societal pressure, so that if there is a trend in society that is evil, it can have a huge impact on many people. Now, I just want to mention a few other scriptural statements. They're not necessarily along the same lines of what I've just been talking about. But we look at a case of Abraham in the 12th chapter of Genesis, after that tremendous promise that God gave Abraham, and quite lengthy story of he gets to the land that the Lord showed him, which was the land of Canaan. Then there's a drought, and so he goes down to Egypt for a period of time. And so when he does, we have this, we find in chapter 12, verse 18. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Abram has been in Egypt for a while." And Pharaoh took Sarah, Abraham's wife, she was known as Sarai at that time, and puts her in his harem, so to speak, because he was under the impression that she was Abraham's sister. In fact, she was a half-sister of Abraham. But she was also his wife. So Pharaoh says, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and go. Get out of here." Not just out of the palace, but out of Egypt. So we have here an instance of Abraham lying, not telling the whole truth about his sister / wife. And so what we have here is an evil thing that a man who's generally a man of God, Abram, did. And Pharaoh understands. Pharaoh has a certain degree of ethics that is, in this case, better than Abraham's. He's not going to take another man's wife. And so we see again that this whole matter of ethics is a complicated thing, but it's always floating around, so to speak. People generally know what's the right thing to do. They may not do it, but they generally know what the right thing to do is. Now, kind of switch another situation with Abraham, and in the 18th chapter, the 25th verse. This is a remarkable story. And what's happening is that the Lord tells Abraham, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because of their wickedness. Well, it just so happens that Abraham's nephew Lot lives in Sodom. And so he is concerned that the Lord's going to destroy Lot, his nephew, at the same time he destroys Sodom. And so he bargains with God. He tries to get God to change his mind or relent or maybe manipulate things so that Lot can be saved. And so he's speaking to the Lord. And he says this, far be it from you, Lord, to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Notice that Abraham is lecturing God about what's right. He says, okay, it's right to destroy the wicked, but look, you can't destroy the righteous at the same time. Far be that from you, shall not, listen to this, shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? Abraham recognizes the Lord as the judge of the whole earth. But he proposes this debating point. Okay, if you're the judge of all the earth, shouldn't you do the right thing? Shouldn't you do justice? Abraham's saying, I have a sense of justice. I have a sense of what's right. And I'm going to throw that into the debate right now. Once again, we see that human beings have a sense of right and wrong. Again, they don't always, we just saw Abraham lied to Pharaoh, so they don't always do the right thing, but there is a great deal of understanding of what is right and wrong, to the point that Abraham would even debate the Lord God about what's right and wrong. Now then, I will try to wind this up. I want to look at Genesis, the 39th chapter. Long story of Joseph. And he's one of the 12 sons of Jacob. And he ends up in Egypt. And he is serving in the household of a man by the name of Potiphar. And Potiphar's wife gets a big time crush on Joseph and does her best to get him to sleep with her. And so we find in the 39th chapter that Joseph, uh, at one point, comes into the household of Potiphar, his boss. Potiphar's gone. The wife is by herself. And she grabs a hold of his robe and says, "Come on." And Joseph runs and leaves his robe behind. Well, that gets him in big trouble because the wife can show the robe and claim that he tried to molest her. So what we see here is that Joseph knew the right thing. And in fact, he did the right thing, even though it wound up putting him in prison. One of the points of importance to this, of many, is Joseph did the right thing. Much later, a man named David did the wrong thing. I've told that story. Those of you who have been following this know the story of David and Bathsheba. Notice this. David lived after the law of God had been given. One of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not commit adultery. David messed up, even though he had the law to instruct him as to what is right. Joseph did the right thing, even though he did not have the law to instruct him. He knew instinctually, he knew his conscience, he knew what was right. The law came along, and in a sense, the law formalized what was already generally known. People knew that you were to honor your father and mother. They knew that they shouldn't steal or kill. They knew that they shouldn't commit adultery. But the 10 Commandments, and then there's a whole bunch of laws besides the 10 Commandments that expand them and even go beyond them, that are in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. All of those laws, part of them are called the Holiness Code. All of them instruct people in righteousness, holiness, doing the right thing. But much of that, in a sense, confirms what's already in the heart of people. But in a sense, what it says is God was on the right side. The law was a message from God. This is how you are to live. Do it. All right. That concludes the Bible K through 12, Grade 4, Part B. Thank you.